7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We will bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. Joining me today from Washington, D.C. is my colleague Nick Harper. Nick, hi.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we get the latest from San Francisco, where President Biden and world leaders are meeting for the APEC summit. And we hear how the UN is trying to get fuel into Gaza. But first, the headlines.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates a global center for excellence for Global South countries called Doordarshan at the second Voice of Global South summit. Israel allows 2 fuel trucks a day to enter Gaza to help the United Nations. Israeli troops retrieve the body of the soldier held hostage adjacent to the Al-Shifa hospital. Japan's Fumio Kishida says China's Xi Jinping has agreed to hold talks over ending the ban on Japanese seafood imports in the 2 leaders' first talks this year. And Mohamed Muizzu takes oath as the 8th president of the Maldives. Indian Minister Kiren Rijiju represents India at the ceremony. So India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the second session of the second Voice of Global South Summit. The focus of the second Voice of Global South Summit is sharing with countries of the Global South the key outcomes achieved in various G20 meetings over the course of India's presidency. The Indian Prime Minister asserted that geographically the Global South has always existed, but it is getting a voice for the first time, and this is because of the joint efforts.
भौगोलिक रूप से तो ग्लोबल साउथ तो हमेशा से रहा है, लेकिन उसे इस प्रकार से वॉइस पहली बार मिल रही है और यह हम सभी के साझा प्रयासों से संभव हुआ है। हम 100 से ज्यादा अलग अलग देश हैं, लेकिन हमारे हित समान है, हमारी प्राथमिकताएं समान है। फ्रेंड्स, पिछले वर्ष दिसंबर में जब भारत ने G20 की अध्यक्षता संभाली तो हमने इस फोरम में ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों की आवाज को आगे बढ़ाना अपना दायित्व माना।
Earlier, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, during his opening remarks at the second session of the Voice of the Global South Summit, touched on the Israel-Hamas conflict, saying that India has called for restraint so far, and this is the time when Global South countries should unite for the greater good.
सिविलियंस की मौत की हम कठोर निंदा करते हैं। राष्ट्रपति महमूद अब्बास जी से बात कर हमने फिलिस्तीन के लोगों के लिए मानवीय सहायता भी भेजी है। ये समय है जब ग्लोबल साउथ के देश ग्रेटर ग्लोबल गुड के लिए एक स्वर में बात करें। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर के लिए हम सब मिलकर 5 C's के साथ आगे बढ़ें। जब मैं 5 C's की बात करता हूं तब कंसल्टेशन, कोऑपरेशन, कम्युनिकेशन, क्रिएटिविटी और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग।
So the summit, the second Voice of the Global South Summit is underway virtually in New Delhi. We will give you more updates as and when they come. Meanwhile, let's move on to America. The US President, Mr. Joe Biden, reassured the Asia-Pacific economies of American commitment at the APEC summit in San Francisco on Thursday and said that his talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping would provide stability for the region and the whole world. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He's tracking all the updates related to the APEC summit and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, it's over to you.
Thanks, Tavi. US President Joe Biden hosted a gala dinner for heads of the delegations at the APEC summit in San Francisco on Thursday night. APEC accounts for about 62% of global GDP and almost half of global trade. It doesn't include India, but the South Asian nation was invited to attend as a guest economy. In his short address, Biden hailed the power of the Pacific to grow economies and connect people to one another.
We gather this week in San Francisco at an inflection point in history. One of the full new challenges. It's not only challenges, but new threats as well. But we have to never forget that we can change and bend the arc of history for the better if we make up our mind to do it. That together we can harness the power of the Pacific to grow our economies, to uplift our workers, to protect our planet, to connect our people to one another and the future of greater prosperity and dignity for all.
In news providing relief for US federal workers, US President Joe Biden has signed a temporary spending bill to prevent a government shutdown. Biden approved the bill a day after it was passed by the Senate. The Senate vote marked the end of this year's third budget standoff in Congress that nearly led to the US defaulting on its debts of more than $31 trillion. A partial shutdown would have been delayed, and it would have delayed the salary payments of around 4 million federal workers. Moving to Israel now, and the war cabinet for the country has approved letting 2 fuel trucks per day into Gaza to help meet UN needs. The official, who declined to be identified, said that the decision came after a request from Washington. The fuel will give minimal support for water, sewage and sanitation systems in Gaza to try and prevent any pandemics. The official added that allowing in the fuel gives Israel extra room to manoeuvre in the international arena so it can continue its campaign to eradicate Hamas. The Israeli military also said that it's found the body of an Israeli hostage who was taken into Gaza by Hamas in the attack last month. Israel's military spokesman said that the body of Yehudit Weiss was recovered by troops in a building near the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces shot dead 2 gunmen who'd opened fire on troops near the West Bank city of Hebron. The Israeli military said there are no reports of injuries from the Israeli side. Meanwhile, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad clashed with Israeli forces in Jenin for several hours on Friday, resulting in heavy gunfire and ambushes with explosives. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell on Friday met family members of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. Borrell posed for pictures with the hostages' families, who held posters of their loved ones after a breakfast meeting in Tel Aviv. On his first visit to Israel since October the 7th's assault, the EU's top diplomat urged Israel not to be consumed by rage in its response to last month's Hamas attack. Sources say Pope Francis is also scheduled to meet relatives of Israeli hostages taken by Hamas next week. Moving on, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said during his meeting with the Chinese president in San Francisco that he urged Xi Jinping to end a ban on imports of Japanese seafood. After the Fukushima nuclear power wastewater release began in August, China instituted a ban on all seafood imports from Japan.
Regarding the release of ALPS advanced liquid processing system treated water into the ocean, I sought calm response from China based on scientific evidence and strongly urged China to lift the ban on importing Japanese food.
An 11-day nationwide military drill is underway in Japan to prepare its air, sea and land forces for a potential conflict in East Asia. During the exercise, Japanese Marines could be seen conducting beach landing exercises. Hovercrafts delivered amphibious assault vehicles to Konoshima in Japan's southwest during the exercise. The drills, which end on November the 20th, also include an air defence exercise in Japan's north and simulated attacks on 5 nuclear reactors, including the Fukushima plant. Moving on to the war in Ukraine now, and in the east of the country, in the Kharkiv region, they've begun building heavily fortified underground schools that will allow children to safely return to in-person studies. Schools in the region of around 2.5 million people, just 20 miles from the Russian border, were forced into online learning after Russia's attack in February 2022. 2 schools, each accommodating up to 500 people, are currently under construction. Meanwhile, the Dutch government has pledged an additional $2.2 billion in military aid for Ukraine in 2024. It's part of a wider package that includes aid for reconstruction and humanitarian needs, which will be increased during the year if needed. The latest package takes the total amount of Dutch support for Ukraine to around €7.5 billion. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Nick, for joining us. Nick Harper joining us from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global. Still to come on the show. Dr. Mohamed Muizzu takes oath as the 8th president of the Maldives at a ceremony attended by many foreign dignitaries, including India's Union Minister Kiren Rijiju.
Welcome to Jaipur.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. On to Asia now. Dr. Mohamed Muizzu has been sworn in as the 8th President of the Republic of Maldives. Vice President Hussein Mohamed Latif also took oath of office. The swearing-in ceremony took place at the Republic Square in capital Mali. Their oath was administered by Chief Justice of the Maldives, Ahmed Muttasim Adnan. India's Minister for Earth Sciences, Kiran Rijiju, attended the ceremony. Next news from India now. The festive season of Diwali proved instrumental in substantial and robust surge of digital payments to unprecedented levels in the month of October this year. The Reserve Bank of India said that the Unified Payments Interface, UPI, added another billion to reach 11 billion transactions in a short span of 2 months, the quickest addition of a billion to date. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has reiterated that Canada has never provided any evidence on Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar's killing. Responding to a question at an event in London, Dr. Jaishankar said India is not ruling out an investigation into Canada's accusation, but Ottawa is yet to provide evidence to back its claim.
In Canada, we feel that the Canadian politics has given space to violent and extreme political opinions which advocate separatism from India, including through violent means. And these people have been accommodated in Canadian politics. They are given the freedom to articulate their views. If you have a reason to make such an allegation, please share the evidence with us. We are not ruling out an investigation and looking at anything which they may have to offer. They haven't done so.
Referring to pro-Khalistani protesters' attack on a consular camp in Canada, Ministry of External Affairs of India said that the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations must be respected.
Our High Commission and consulates in Canada regularly organize consular camps. One such camp was organized near Vancouver on November 12th or 13th to provide life certificate to pensioners. The event was held successfully despite attempts by a few radical elements to cause trouble. Our Consul General was not present at that site. We reiterate the need for nations to respect the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations so that our diplomats can discharge their diplomatic obligations.
A group of international negotiators and United Nations representatives are meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, to come up with an international treaty to tackle the world's plastic pollution problem. According to the United Nations, less than 10% of the plastic waste created globally has been recycled. Interlocutors are hoping to reach consensus on a legally binding agreement by next year. DD India's William Denslow reports from the UN headquarters in New York.
An estimated 430 million tonnes of plastic is produced every year, but the United Nations warns that 2/3 of it ends up thrown away. Scientists say this is creating an ecological crisis. The social and environmental cost of plastic pollution is estimated to be between $300 to $600 billion a year. And analysts expect plastic production to double over the next 2 decades. In a bid to turn the tide, negotiators from nations around the world gathered in Nairobi, Kenya this week as efforts continue to reach consensus on a treaty to address the threat of plastic pollution. This is the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee's 3rd session as it continues work on a so-called zero draft text.
This means rethinking everything along the chain from polymer to production, from product to packaging. We need to use fewer virgin materials, less plastic, and no harmful chemicals. We need to ensure that we use and reuse and recycle resources more efficiently and dispose safely of what is left over.
A key mission is to see the world move from a throwaway economy to a reuse economy. But deep divisions remain on issues including whether to focus on cuts to plastic production or just the management of plastic waste. The INC3 meeting is slated to wrap up on Sunday, before delegates reconvene for another round of talks in Canada in April. William Denslow in New York reporting for DD India.
The United Nations top court will hand down its ruling on Friday on a case brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan. Armenia wants the court to put restrictive measures in place to prevent what they call the ethnic cleansing of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh region, a claim Azerbaijan denies. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports from Brussels.
It's now nearly 2 months since Azerbaijani forces stormed into Nagorno-Karabakh, uprooting the local self-proclaimed Republic of Artsakh, which had close ties with Armenia. What followed was the exodus of more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians from the region, leaving shattered lives behind. Armenia now says the few that remain are at risk of ethnic cleansing at the hands of Azerbaijani troops, and it wants the International Court of Justice to step in. Armenia is asking the ICJ to put in place 10 provisional measures aimed at protecting the rights of ethnic Armenians from that Nagorno-Karabakh region. The head of Armenia's legal team says nothing other than targeted and unequivocal provisional measures protecting the rights of ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh will suffice to prevent the ethnic cleansing Azerbaijan is perpetrating from continuing and becoming irreversible. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan has strenuously denied all of Armenia's allegations. The country's deputy foreign minister, Elnur Mammadov, said Azerbaijan has not engaged and will not engage in ethnic cleansing or any form of attack on the civilian population of Karabakh. The International Court of Justice is currently working through 2 similar cases linked to the decades-long conflict between the two sides. In 2021, Armenia filed a claim accusing Azerbaijan of breaching the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Shortly thereafter, Azerbaijan filed a counterclaim accusing Armenia of doing the same thing. The legal wranglings between an emboldened Azerbaijan and a weakened Armenia will likely carry on beyond this ruling, a ruling which even the court will have no practical way to enforce. Alex Cadier in Brussels reporting for DD India.
SpaceX is about to test its spacecraft flight for a second time as part of a wider mission with NASA to get humans back to the moon. The first test flight blew up minutes after takeoff, and it's taken months to get regulators to clear another try. Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
SpaceX is hoping to be part of the next giant leap for mankind, 50 years after humans first went to the moon. A test window for the Starship spacecraft launch will open from Saturday, when the spacecraft is due to shoot up and then detach from its rocket. CEO Elon Musk said earlier in the year he sees about a 50% chance of it reaching orbital velocity, but even getting to stage separation is a win. That's better odds than when it first tested in April, when the Starship faltered within minutes after it took off and had to self-destruct, exploding over the Gulf of Mexico. Since then, SpaceX has had to wait for safety and environmental reviews, but has now been cleared by regulators to try again. The ultimate goal is for the spacecraft to play a part in NASA's Artemis moon mission, a return to the lunar surface in 2025. And even to put humans onto Mars for the first time. Caroline Malone in Washington reporting for DD India.
And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Pedro Sanchez was re-elected by a majority of legislators to form a new government on Thursday. It comes despite divisions in the country over his decision to grant Catalan separatists amnesty in exchange for their crucial support in a vote of confidence. Argentina is gearing up for presidential elections. The country's finance minister and presidential candidate Sergio Massa ended his election campaign at a public high school in Buenos Aires. Argentina, facing its worst economic crisis in decades, will vote on Sunday. A magnitude 6.7 earthquake struck the southern Philippines on Friday, killing 1 person, injuring dozens and damaging buildings, authorities said. The quake struck off the Mindanao at a depth of 60 kilometers, according to the German Research Center for Geosciences. And Manchester United's American owners, the Glazer family, are set to finalise a $33 per share deal with Jim Ratcliffe that will see the British billionaire acquire a 25% stake in the English soccer club. This is what Sky News reported today. The Glazer family had last year said that they were looking at options for the 20-time English champions, including a new investment or a potential sale. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.
इतनी जल्दी पैसे डबल
ओ जमा करोगे तो फिर भुगतोगे चलो ऐसी लुभाने वाली स्कीम में पैसे जमा करना यानी धोखे की संभावना इसलिए पहले पूरी जांच उसके बाद पैसे जमा नहीं तो आपके पैसे हो जाएंगे आरबीआई कहता है
जानकार बनिए सतर्क रहिए
Climate change is wreaking havoc across the world. It's time to save the Earth or face extinction. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times, only on DD India.
We are taking up the phenomenon of India's neighborhood first policy. This is one of the signature initiatives of the Narendra Modi government since 2014 and has yielded enormous regional integration effects and positive benefits for all the members of South Asia and the extended neighborhood of India.
We have to understand some of this anti-India feeling, anti-India sentiment in those in the neighboring countries. They're politically motivated also.
Whether it's connectivity or any other project is not just simply driven by China's BRI, or it's not just simply because China is doing, therefore we are doing.
A platform for the developing world, amplifying the voice of the Global South with a focus on the growing economies, resolving the conflicts, showcasing the culture, tradition, heritage and diversity. Watch Voice of the Global South at these times on DD India.
Climate change is wreaking havoc across the world. It's time to save the Earth or face extinction. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times, only on DD India.
Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to address the second session of the Voice of Global South Summit.
एक्सेलेंसीज, आप सभी ने जो बहुमूल्य विचार रखे उसके लिए मैं आप सभी का आभारी हूं। आज पूरे दिन चली ग्लोबल साउथ समिट के 10 सत्रों में महत्वपूर्ण विषयों पर चर्चा हुई है। बहुत उपयोगी आइडियाज सामने आए हैं और सभी के विचार सुनने के बाद मैं टॉप 10 शेयर्ड प्रायोरिटीज को हाईलाइट करना चाहूंगा। ये प्रायोरिटीज आने वाले समय में हमारे आपसी सहयोग के मार्ग को प्रशस्त करेगी। पहला, हम सभी वन फ्यूचर की दिशा में सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास और सबका प्रयास की भावना से काम करेंगे। ये प्रयास करेंगे कि ग्लोबल साउथ में जहां मानवता का 2/3 हिस्सा रहता है, कोई भी पीछे न छूटे। हम प्रयास करेंगे कि नॉर्थ साउथ और पूर्व पश्चिम की दूरियां कम हो। हम अपना भविष्य खुद बनाएंगे। हम अपना भाग्य खुद तय करेंगे। दूसरा, सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट के प्रति हमारी प्रतिबद्धता आज विश्व कल्याण की गारंटी है। हमें गरीबी को हटाना भी है और साथ साथ ये धरती जिसे भारत में हम मां कहते हैं, उस धरती मां का संरक्षण भी करना है। क्लाइमेट एक्शन का आधार होना चाहिए इक्विटी, क्लाइमेट जस्टिस, साझा दायित्व और साझा सामर्थ्य। तीसरा, हम क्लीन, सस्टेनेबल, जस्ट, एफोर्डेबल और इंक्लूसिव एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन की दिशा में काम करेंगे। हम विश्व में फूड सिक्योरिटी को चुनौतियों का समाधान करने का भी प्रयास करेंगे। चौथा, डेवलपमेंट फाइनेंस के लिए हम कंसल्टेटिव, डिमांड ड्रिवन और पीपल सेंट्रिक प्रयासों को प्राथमिकता देते हैं। ये अनिवार्य है कि ग्लोबल साउथ के देश डेट ट्रैप में न फंसे, किसी भी देश की संप्रभुता कमजोर न हो। पांचवा, हम सार्वजनिक सेवाओं की डिलीवरी में सुधार के लिए ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों में डिजिटल पब्लिक गुड्स के माध्यम को अपनाएंगे। छठा, हम मल्टीलेटरलिज्म में सुधार के लिए साथ मिलकर काम करते रहेंगे ताकि ग्लोबल गवर्नेंस की व्यवस्थाएं और अधिक इंक्लूसिव, कंसल्टेटिव और रिप्रेजेंटेटिव बने। सातवां, सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट में महिलाओं की अहम भूमिका को देखते हुए विमेन लेड डेवलपमेंट को बढ़ावा देंगे और समाज के सभी क्षेत्रों में महिलाओं की सार्थक भागीदारी बढ़ाने के लिए भरपूर प्रयास करेंगे। आठवां, हम ग्लोबल साउथ में आपसी निवेश को बढ़ावा देंगे। हम ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन्स में ग्लोबल साउथ को जोड़ने के लिए कार्य करेंगे। नवा, हम आतंकवाद और उग्रवाद के खिलाफ अपने सहयोग को मजबूत करेंगे। अपने साइबर स्पेस को सुरक्षित रखते हुए हम आतंकियों द्वारा नई टेक्नोलॉजी के दुरुपयोग को रोकने के लिए भी डटकर प्रयास करेंगे। और 10वां, हम 2030 के एसडीजी एजेंडा को पूरी तरह से और समयबद्ध रूप से लागू करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध रहेंगे। एक्सेलेंसीज, एक बार फिर मैं दूसरे वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ समिट में शामिल होने के लिए आप सबका बहुत आभारी हूं। भारत हमेशा अपने अनुभव और अपनी क्षमताएं ग्लोबल साउथ के साथ साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। भारत हमेशा एक विश्वसनीय पार्टनर की तरह कार्यरत रहेगा। हम निरंतर संपर्क में रहेंगे और ग्लोबल साउथ का हमारा संवाद आने वाले समय में भी जारी रहेगा। मैं फिर एक बार आप सबका बहुत बहुत आभारी हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
So that was Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressing the second session of the second Voice of Global South Summit virtually. Prime Minister Modi highlighted the 10 priorities for the greater good of all. Allow me to tell you once again these 10 priorities as listed by Indian Prime Minister there. He said that nobody will be left behind in Global South. Second, he said there will be commitment among all members for sustainable development in the region. That includes climate action, climate justice, and shared responsibility for achieving this. He said that the members will also try and achieve clean, just and renewable energy transition, and they will also try to address food security issues. He said that there will be a consultative demand-driven approach to finance mechanisms in the countries of the Global South. He said there will be an approach for digital public goods delivery. He said sixth, the countries will try to reform multilateralism for achieving good global governance. He said that the role of women has to be appreciated in development. He said women-led development will be the core of our functioning systems, and he said that we will try and also promote investment in Global South. Further, he said that combating terrorism together, including cybersecurity mechanisms, is also one of the listed priorities of the Global South that has been deliberated in this session today. And last, Prime Minister Modi said that all the members have a shared commitment to achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that the dialogue between the Global South countries will continue in the times to come. And earlier today, India's Prime Minister inaugurated a Global Center for Excellence for Global South countries. This was called Doordarshan. So all these priorities are being listed at the second Voice of Global South Summit. This was the second session. And of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi telling there that all the effort is to get the global good together for these countries so that everybody speaks in one voice for the greater good of humanity. So those were the highlights of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address, closing remarks of the second session of the second Voice of Global South Summit. That's it in this broadcast. News and updates continue on DD India. Stay tuned.